Happy Purim, Afreilichen Purim. I'd like to share something very unique with you today. A year and a half ago, I received an email from a very senior member in Israel's Defense Department, an official, and he wrote to me, "Dear Rabbi Shmutkin, I just came across this letter. I think you will find it of interest. Sincerely," and his name. The letter, as you'll soon see, is so relevant and so timely for today, and specifically on Purim, I'd like to share it with you today. The letter is dated Machras Purim Yerushalayim, the day after Purim of Jerusalem. In Yerushalayim, Purim is observed the day after the rest of us observe Purim. We call it Shushan Purim, but here the Rebbe calls it Purim Yerushalayim. Now, very uncharacteristically, there's no year on this letter, so it took us quite a few days of detective work to understand what's going on. I'd love to read through the letter with you, or at least the key points, and tell you what's going on behind the scenes so we can really appreciate the uniqueness and the beauty of this letter. The Rebbe starts off, the letter, first of all, is from March 4th, 1980. That's what we figured out. And the Rebbe begins, "Thank you for your letter and for the updates you've been sending. I've received them and I withheld my reply because unfortunately I've been waiting for a miracle, that the Jews finally do what they need to, or for some other supernatural event to change the course of things." The Rebbe is referring here quite wryly to the peace agreements that were starting to be implemented between Israel and Egypt. The Rebbe consistently believed that these would lead to absolute calamity for Israel, the giving away of territories that were vital for Israel's security, and the oil wells in the Sinai. The Rebbe is saying, there's this hope that they'll miraculously result in more security for Israel, despite this catastrophic mistake. Re'eh ze nes. Behold, suddenly a miracle, which occurred, as they say in English, with perfect timing. And you see the Rebbe suddenly switches to cursive English for these words. The timing is perfect on this. Couldn't have been better timing. Which is, as you see, the letter is Yiddish, Hebrew, but for this, the Rebbe switched to English. On Erev Purim, March 1st, there was a vote in the UN which categorically put to rest the stubborn claim that the Jewish people have achieved unprecedented breakthroughs in the international arena, most recently with the Camp David Accords. And the Rebbe goes on to kind of say how absurd it is to believe that the Camp David Accords are going to result in true peace and security for Israel. What happened here? On March 1st, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 465, condemning Israel for settlement in the territories and especially Yerushalayim, and calling on states not to provide any assistance to Israel that would be used in connection with the settlements. The statement came out because Israel was having discussions about building in Hebron. We did a short film on that whole episode, which we can link below. But what was uniquely terrible about what happened here is that the United States, under President Carter, they actually voted for this resolution condemning Israel, and it passed unanimously. Back to the letter. During these days of Purim, and especially Purim Yerushalayim, meaning the day after Purim, in Jerusalem, the Jews made the correct decision. So two even greater miracles occurred. Number one, that the Jews decided and announced with one voice, and more importantly, in a way that the United States really felt it, and they saw that we meant what we're talking about, that we truly mean it. I'll explain more in a minute. And second of all, the second miracle was that the immediate, natural, and logical result of the Jews assembled and stood up for their lives occurred. Now, these are words from the Megillah. The Jews gathered together, they assembled, and they stood up for their lives. The most powerful nation announced before the eyes of the entire world that it had made a mistake, and it retracts its action. This occurrence, the Rebbe writes, to the best of my knowledge, has no precedence in the history of the United States. What happened here? Rather than flinching, instead of folding, Israel came out with a sharp, unanimous condemnation of the UN action, and the US in particular, from both sides of the Israeli aisle. Prime Minister Menachem Begin and opposition leader Shimon Peres. And in fact, the plans to create Jewish settlement in Hebron were fast-tracked. Now, it being an election year, very quickly, Carter came under massive domestic pressure for having done this. And on March 3rd, Carter clarified that the U.S.'s position was not proper nor practical, and that Jerusalem should be undivided, with its status to be determined in peace negotiations. And he further said that he had approved the vote only with the understanding that all references to Jerusalem were to be removed. So what happened here? Carter essentially took his Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, and he threw him under the bus, and he said it was all his mistake. And he did a 180-degree turn and said, we never really meant it, everything's fine and dandy, and we support Israel. And weeks later, Carter was still giving press conferences with totally uncharacteristic for him statements of support for Israel's ownership of the territories. They stood strong, they stood united, and the result was that within a couple of days, the United States did an absolute U-turn on its position, which was frankly against Israel's only days earlier. The lessons, the Rebbe says, to be learned from this episode are twofold. First of all, the Rebbe says, standing up for one's life succeeds, just like it was during the days of Purim. Va'amoid al nafsham matzliach. And, on the other hand, vitur, a compromise, leads to a second compromise, followed by a third compromise, etc. And the second lesson is that when the president made a mistake, he had no problem doing an absolute about-face because he wants to win the elections. Immediately he announced, I made a mistake. How much more so when we're talking about the fate of 3 million Jews? If we're making a mistake, if we're going on a wrong path, at the time the Rebbe was talking about giving away the oil fields and the territory in the Sinai, it's okay to say, I made a mistake, and make an about-face. And the Rebbe goes on with more words about the true security for Israel, not just in words, but also in actions. And then, at the end, an additional handwritten note to the recipient of this letter. The Rebbe is telling him, it is my opinion that in these crazy days, you must continue in your position as you were until now. I guess he was considering leaving his position in the Defense Department in order to keep things organized and to keep things continuing on a stable path, and with additional strength of Gaon Yaakov, of Jewish pride, as it was by Mordechai, who did not kneel and did not bow before Haman, followed by the Rebbe's blessing and signature. I hope you enjoyed this letter and the message that comes with it. May God grant us that the Jews stand up to defend their lives, literally, as it was in the times of Purim, and as we need to do in our times. And may Hashem do his part in showing us his love for his people. May the Jews have light and joy and gladness and glory immediately, as the Megillah teaches us. L'chaim and a happy Purim.